You're listening to the Podcast Detroit Network. Visit www.podcastdetroit.com for more information.
Greetings, weary listeners. You've come to this podcast seeking something. What is it, I wonder? Is it knowledge of long-forgotten secrets, ancient and forbidden? Is it the dark craving to fill your wanton ears with tales of darkness, depravity, and dread? Or is it perhaps to slake your already gluttonous desire for more knowledge, having already tread down this dark path of horror storytelling for countless eons, only to haunt it for countless more, undying, eternal? Welcome, then, to the Storyteller Conclave.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, friends.
We thought we'd have a little bit of fun there at the beginning to get you guys in the mood.
And that's what we're talking about today.
Yes.
We are. We had a journey with that word mood.
God, we had it. Oh man,
we were like, they were doing theme. Is
Style?
it genre? Is it style? What
Taste?
And then we pulled up some old notes, and it was like, how do you set the mood? And I was like, oh my god, it was right there.
Mood was the word. Why couldn't we think of the word mood? We should just stop. We should not do podcasts anymore.
We're done.
We'll just flip the table.
This will be
It's
the
over.
last
Yeah,
episode.
seriously. No. And then literally like a day or two later, we're like, oh, we need to start filling out the show sheet. And I'm like, yeah, I got a few things written down there. And Sarah's like, I have opinions. And I'm like, okay. And I look away from the show sheet for a couple hours. And when I come back, there are 3 pages of notes.
I had opinions. My hand slipped. Sorry, guys.
It's all right. It's
But
all right.
You're stuck in here with me now.
That's right. And Knox apparently in Technolit. Hey, guys. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for joining us.
If you want to join us on the chat in the future, join our Patreon. Go to patreon.com, look up Storyteller Conclave, and
chat with us during the show.
check a
shoot
box.
questions at us. And,
That's right. We'd love to have you. Love to have you. So, we have a show to talk about today that's full of horror and dread.
Full of horror and dread. So the mood.
Yeah.
How do you set the mood for horror and dread? How do you tell those kind of stories and have it land, have it be effective, have sufficiently freak out your player characters?
There's one thing you taught me.
What's that?
Anticipation.
Oh, see, Rob, if you're gonna do it right, man.
Hey, we only have an hour. I can't squeeze that much time out of it.
That's true.
So, but no, I think anticipation has a lot to do with it, and I think anticipation is something that is not in the rules. Like where rules talk about timing, they talk about rhythm, like of when things should come out.
Sure.
They talk about, rounds and cycles and things like that. And some actually talk about heartbeats in stories of like, your heartbeats are when important moments happen, but they don't really talk about individual scenes and how to kind of cultivate how a scene goes together.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of systems have some sort of a storyteller section in them. That look at there's the whole Dungeon Master's Guide,
right?
But most other most other systems that have like a core book to them will at least have a chapter, if not an entire section of the book dedicated to how to tell the story.
Right.
And there are a lot of great tips.
Oh, don't get me wrong. I agree.
In those things about how to set atmosphere and mood and stuff like that. But
right.
What I find is that horror is one of those things that it's not really. It's not easy to. Like, it's easy to make people feel heroic in a heroic game.
Mm-hmm.
It's
I do it all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty easy to just put on some background music from, some fight music from Final Fantasy or something like that. And set an appropriate mood for a tough fight or something like that. But horror is one of those ones that it gets a little tricky with the storytelling. So,
on a side note, hey, Ilya May, go ahead and jump on the Podcast Detroit website and go into the Listen to Live and hit Studio 4 and see if you can hear us there. It's not just the phone app anymore. Give it a shot. But thanks for joining us too.
Yeah, thank you, Ilya May.
But I've struggled at it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something. I mean, I really don't like. I don't watch horror movies.
Yeah.
I don't mind certain themes when the theme of horror or the mood of horror when it's appropriate, when it makes sense to the story. But like you'll never see me like watching slaughterhouse or gore. You know, I think that there's certain senses of dread that make fun movies. Like you've got the Warm Bodies has a certain sense of dread in it, but it's not really horror. It's zomedy.
Right, yeah, zomedy.
Yeah, it's or Zom Com as they call it. Yeah,
right.
So I think there's a certain thanks Heatsink. There's a certain sense of division there, and I think we need to kind of remind that today's mood is going to be more away from that we're going to be focusing more towards the more towards what the differences in horror and dread are, and not so much Zom-Com. We're kind of sidestepping that.
Yes.
So
now, before we go any further, we do want to just kind of issue just a minor disclaimer.
Yeah.
We are going to be delving into this subject of horror and dread.
Yep.
We may be giving some examples,
some descriptions
and stuff like that. So, subject matter in this podcast may get just a little tense,
dark.
Maybe. We are doing this with the understanding, though, that these are just descriptions of things, and that we are going to try to keep this above board, but family friendly.
Yeah, as best as we can.
Just understand that if you do, kind of squick easily, I think is the word. Then
we're going to try not to hit a lot of. I mean, we're going to do our best not to hit bad buttons, but it's going to get hit because of what we're talking about in general.
Just exercise some discretion, please.
Yes. So
that
being said. Stephen King or Ray Bradbury?
Is it Crypt Keeper or is it Twilight Zone?
Very good questions. Good questions.
Let's back it up just a little bit before that.
Okay.
Because you defined horror and you defined dread and you defined Zom-Com.
Yes.
Or rather, you threw those terms out there. But
that's true. We should kind of talk about what they are.
Let's talk about what those are for a second. So basically, there's really two kind of key types of fear.
Yes.
That you can evoke. Okay, and that is horror. And that is dread.
Yes.
Now, those sound like synonyms, but I assure you they are not.
Yes.
Okay. Horror is defined as an intense feeling of fear, shock, or disgust. Whereas dread is great fear or apprehension. Okay. How these work in practice is when you know that the monster is in the next room over, but you are not in any immediate danger, but you know the monster's there, you feel dread.
Yep.
When the monster whips around the corner and you see fangs and tentacles, that's horror.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. That feeling you're getting, that's horror.
That's horror.
Yeah. And just to be clear, just as much as if your story is set in, like, we'll go back to the high school setting, if you know that the exam starts in 10 minutes...
The feeling you're feeling is dread.
Whereas when you get to the exam and see that it's 26 pages and you have 1 hour... That's horror.
Yes.
So, but again, we're kind of defining that in this show is that we're not just talking about horrible things.
Right.
We're talking about a mood.
Yeah. How to evoke that feeling.
Now we're going to get into horrible things. Don't get us wrong.
Oh yeah. There's plenty of horrible things.
It's much easier to get into horrible things.
So anyways, those are, I kind of want you to understand that the two of those, because there's two different ways in which you evoke those feelings.
Yeah. And I think you have a good example as we start getting into this. Like we were just talking about the different storytelling styles by throwing those names out there. But I think you kind of defined a really good explanation of dread. And I don't think a lot of people recognize it in dread, and that is Aliens is a good example of dread because you don't see the aliens.
You don't see the alien, yeah.
Like, yeah, I mean, if you had seen the trailers... You knew what to expect, but most of that movie was about the dread that they were there. I mean, everybody remembers the scene where he's looking down at the scanner and the dots are getting closer and the dots are getting closer. And there is, if it was just a screen of a dude holding a controller that's saying they're getting closer, that's a sense of dread on its own. But then there are these other elements that wrap around that you don't know what the heck it is.
You're hearing the beeping of the thing. You're seeing the dots getting closer. You're watching people get freaked out.
Yeah,
and we'll touch on why all of those are great elements of setting the mood later. But and it's all contrasted against them standing in a perfectly still and silent room.
Yeah,
and screaming things like that's inside the room. That can't be right. They're right on top of us.
Right.
Where are they? Room is still.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you're like, you're feeling that impending sense of it could happen at any moment.
Yeah.
That's dread. That is the essence of dread right there.
Yeah. I mean, it's the typical, the call is coming from inside the house.
Yes.
Like that realization, where it's, this isn't something external, this is something internal. I would almost say that the end of Fight Club has a sense of dread. Because you realize it's internal. It was him the whole time.
Spoiler alert, by the way.
Whatever. Seriously, we ain't talking about this.
Rob,
so
really?
But I would say that when you're framing things like that, remember that that's a big thing. You can throw that dread, and it has nothing to do with mechanics. Like that's untouchable.
Oh yeah.
So.
Yep. Yeah, dread of the two. Dread is my favorite.
Yeah.
But like I said, I've got some pretty strong opinions about this one.
Yeah, I liked your I can take it in a fight. Kind of is another statement that's part of that whole, like, is it really scary?
So let's talk about that though.
Yeah.
Okay, so we started saying, is it Stephen King or is it Ray Bradbury? Is it Crypt Keeper or is it Twilight Zone? Okay.
Yeah.
So are we talking about monster horror?
Right.
Or are we talking about human horror?
Right.
And when I say human horror, I understand we're dealing with fantasy, gaming and stuff like that. So
Right.
what I mean is human as in like relatable humanoid,
Right.
consciousness.
A demon who is tricking you.
No, human horror more on the level of, is this just a person
Right.
who is the scary thing, or is it an eldritch being from beyond the stars? That's monster horror.
Right.
But like the grim, Jack the Ripper.
Mm-hmm.
Jack the Ripper is human horror.
Yes.
Because that was just a dude and
Yeah.
who did all those messed up things.
Sure.
So that's the first kind of discussion we want to have is when we're talking about horror, are we talking about monster horror or human horror? And that comes down to the first thing about how to execute monster horror. Is monsters are only scary if you can't fight back.
Or you can't fight the feeling.
No, if you can't fight back.
All right, fair enough.
Dead serious. That's the line right there.
Okay.
So, for instance, a great example of this is like the difference between. See, I'm thinking of a video game series that I played a little while ago. Well, for instance, Alien is a great example.
Sure.
Okay, the first Alien movie,
Yeah.
not second, where we have colonial marines on the spot.
Right.
Okay? The first one, where we are a bunch of scientists and geologists,
Pretty much, yeah.
in a some ship in the middle of nowhere, didn't know what the hell they were excavating.
Right.
Nobody on that ship stood a chance against the xenomorph.
No.
At all. They were just cannon fodder for the thing.
Right.
Even with all their makeshift, they tried to make flamethrowers.
Mhm.
Nobody ever harmed that monster.
Yes.
Even Ripley,
Yeah.
who essentially thwarts it at the end, didn't take it in combat.
No.
She strapped herself in and blew it out the airlock.
That's right, because the smart woman with the cat survived.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And no one listened to the smart woman with the cat.
Not
and
a
they
single
all
one.
died.
That's right.
5 stars.
That's right.
But yeah, she doesn't even beat the thing at the end.
No.
She traps it and thwarts it, but
Yeah.
she does not defeat it.
Nope.
So the whole thing is you must feel helpless, okay? Because the moment you can fight the monster,
Mhm.
it becomes a combat challenge and it becomes a stat block.
Yeah.
And I mean, if I've got a machine gun, I'm not afraid of the zombies.
Yeah, or if I can move at a faster pace than it, or I can out heal it, or whatever. If I'm fighting numbers, that's a matter of rolls.
What I was thinking about earlier was the video game that I played, a series called Penumbra. It was a survival horror video game, first person.
Okay.
Really great games if you got them. Same people who made Amnesia, Dark Descent.
Oh, that one. Okay. Yeah. Another
the
game
fir-
I didn't
the-
play
the-
but know of.
The first game is called Penumbra Overture.
Okay.
And the second game in the series is called Penumbra Black Plague.
Great.
Overture gave you a mining pick. Now, it was not a terribly effective weapon.
Right.
But what you could do is you could grab these gas canisters that were around, and if you hit the gas canister, it would have like a 3-second counter before it blew up, and you could pick it up and fling it in a direction, and it would blow up and kill some of the monsters for you.
Sure.
And once you figured that out,
Game was over.
it was just, I mean, it was unwieldy. It wasn't like a gun where it was just point and click.
Right.
But you know what? I stopped being afraid. It was tense.
It was
tense, but I wasn't horrified by the game.
Right.
Okay. And I was really happy when I started playing Penumbra Black Plague, the sequel, when they utterly removed that mechanic from the game. You didn't have even a single weapon.
Right.
You had a light source. Congratulations. You can now see the horrors coming out at you that you are defenseless against.
Yep.
And they like even picking up objects in the environment and flinging them at them did nothing.
Nope.
They were just inexorable and they killed you.
Yep.
And that game scared the living poop out of me. And that was all it took.
Yep.
I just needed to not be able to fight back.
So let's take a step from that to what you can't identify.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's a big thing in specifically like D&D and game settings is we're all about coming to identify what things are.
Yeah.
Many
things
times
have names, things have stats. Things
right.
have,
Like the moment that someone's just like, oh, it's breathing acid and it's got multiple legs and came out of a dungeon wall, that's a carry-on. You know, I know the stats on that thing. Even though your character might not, your brain is already in that mode. You know, it's already identified what the monster is, what the horror is, and now it's in, I guess, defense mode, like you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we move from unable to do anything about it to not knowing what the heck it is?
And that's definitely step number 2. If you can't identify it, you can't wrap your brain around it. And if you can't wrap your brain around it, you will fear the hell out of it.
Right.
Fear is bred from the unknown. This is actually, we talked about it last episode. Yeah. I'm going to throw it right out there. This is one of those things that Lovecraft did very, very well.
I agree.
His descriptions were largely, it was indescribable.
Right.
But we saw the effect that it had, driving people insane and
Yep.
eating them, or that was the last time they were ever heard from, or they came out of some twisted monstrosity afterwards, or something.
Yeah.
But his description was, what the hell is that?
Yeah.
Alien, again, you mentioned it earlier.
Yep.
They never showed the thing.
No. And I think that was one of the best parts about it was that the alien, it almost felt like every time you saw it, you saw a different aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that it was either better at or faster at or more deadly at or whatever. Like every single step, it was like, how do you beat something that literally can, step out of fire, or that not only like after you're holding its mouth, it has another mouth to kill you with.
Yes, exactly.
That says it right there. It's like, okay, dude. All right, I got its claws. Great. I got its head. Great. What is that? Is that another mouth? Like
when its jaws open wide
Exactly.
and there's more jaws inside. That's a moray.
That's right. It actually is a moray eel.
That is a moray eel, yeah.
Yeah, that's how that works.
But yeah, I actually pulled this off of IMDb. The Xenomorph has 4 minutes of screen time in that movie and doesn't make its first appearance until almost an hour into the film.
Isn't that amazing?
It's phenomenal.
That's great storytelling.
That is amazing storytelling. It is the subject. The name is literally Alien.
Yeah.
And we don't see it until an hour into the movie.
If that was true for like John Wick, like you didn't see John Wick until an hour into the movie, you just saw bodies.
He'd be the scariest mofo.
You just saw bodies. That's
Yeah.
all. Like it was all coming from you show like John Wick 4 Aftermath, and it's
Right.
literally just the assassins who are sent to kill him, who are geared to the nines. There's like a whole squad of them, and it's just them going building to building and finding nothing but bodies of everyone else who was involved.
Yes.
See, that would be dread for them.
Yes.
Excitement for that last moment, but dread for them. So yeah, it's that inevitability. But I think that presses that inevitability, that kind of pause, kind of presses us into stepping away from monsters and into that human aspect.
Oh yeah.
Because if you can identify it, but you can't comprehend why or what or what's next. I think like the Moriarty kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
Where it just is there and it's powerful and it's not just dominance, because that can be an aspect. but I think it's a cheaper form of it. When it's smarter, but it's smarter in simplistic ways.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was one of the things that made Moriarty as a character that keeps returning beautiful, like that mastermind villain who just doesn't go away because he's prepared for everything.
Yeah.
Even though his plans are ridiculous.
He seems inexorable.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The Joker is a character that is kind of like that, where you see the simplisticness of what you're allowed to see, but behind that, it just keeps getting deeper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And well, the thing about human horror is that in the exact opposite of monster horror, it depends on you being able to identify in some way with that person, if even only that we're both people. Like, this isn't a monster. The Joker isn't a monster.
No.
The Joker's a dude.
He's a dude.
And he does all these horrible things and kills all these people in all these horrible ways, and he enjoys it.
Yeah.
And, like, on some fundamental level, you and me and him are all the same because we're both people.
Yeah.
Like, we're on the same playing field. He's nothing supernatural.
No.
No.
I mean, granted, he might not feel pain the same way now, but realistically, that's about it.
It's one of the things is that the character doesn't actually have to experience any of these like psychological aspects themselves.
Yeah.
Okay. Just witnessing it can really set a mood of horror.
Totally.
What comes to mind is like Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. If you ever got a chance to play that,
I've watched it.
The main character of that from the very beginning,
right at the opening,
narrated by the voices in her head that also kind of act as like combat cues for you because they like whisper things like "look out from behind" and stuff. Just that's how you know that you're about to get attacked.
Right,
is the voices in your head tell you?
Right,
and they are not nice to you.
And they did a good job of surrounding you in that sound.
Yeah, if you listen to that with headphones
I
on.
listened to a couple of the playthroughs on headphones, and they said they captured it in the 3D surround sound. It really did sound like that. It was really, really challenging.
But being in the front seat to kind of witness firsthand madness and psychoses and all these horrifying things that kind of are terrible aspects of the human mind is a horrifying experience.
Yeah.
Having to watch that and having to experience it and knowing that she is going through these things.
Right.
So you don't have to horrify your players directly.
Correct.
Simply putting something horrifying in front of them and saying, this is happening now.
I got a good example for you. So I was reading about different things as we were getting up to this, and a guy had written 2 scenes for an opening. And because he had his players kind of talk about, write him who they were. And so he rewrote the intro. And the opening of his story was about a war that was happening. His players were basically guards on a caravan. Some of them were part of the caravan people who were traveling. Some of them were just guards in the caravan. And it was the distance was a pretty long distance between these 2 major cities. And where war breaks out between their country and another country, and it's a border area. And so they come over this rise to the remnants of the battle.
Yeah.
And battle in the distance. And they're expecting, like, they're tired, they're all exhausted. Like, he literally started them off with a point of exhaustion because they had been traveling for so long.
Sure.
And so as they're coming down to the village, his original point was that, they find a lot of ash and burn and very few things, and they could search for stuff. And then he read that a lot of the players' backstories were of training and academia and things like that. And he's like, none of these people have ever seen war, like the carnage of war. And so he rewrote the scene, and the end of the scene is them finally pulling into the town. And they see a little girl covered in soot. And she's clearly, like, the area around her eyes are darker and streaked from her tears. And she's holding the burnt remains of her teddy bear in her burnt hands.
Baby.
And that's he wanted them to realize the dread of war.
Yeah.
That it's right, and they could still see the fires in the next town, like which is like maybe several hours journey away.
Yeah,
along the same river, and it's like they know what's happening there. That this is not the end, and it was like that they're going to be chasing this war all the way to where they need to go, and that's really what his campaign was about. Was they had to somehow beat the front to figure, to help.
Sure.
And Gesundheit. So I liked the way that he decided, because his players didn't know, like the backgrounds never put that out. So he decided to rewrite to give them perspective.
Sure.
And I
absolutely.
thought, I mean, that's a way to take and set a mood. That's horrific. You're seeing horror, but at the same time, it's instilling dread.
Yeah.
So you're getting both, and those are human. That's it. There's nothing supernatural about that moment. That's simple, and it's effective. It's powerful. I mean, I feel bad talking about it.
I know, right?
And he went into greater detail than that. Like he described and we're not even talking like super creative, ridiculous writing like you'd find in sci-fi or anything like that. It was just very plain text, all the way down to the moment when they see the little girl by the well, and it's just like you're like, oh my god, like there's nothing here, there's nothing left, and it's powerful. That kind of stuff is powerful. So you have to remember that when we're talking about psychological horrors, we're talking about moments that are part and relatable to what we know. But sometimes knowing what the players' backgrounds are or knowing where they were from help you kind of craft something that's specific for them, that is still very relatable and human.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that the big thing to remember is that the key to psychological horror is that it's a mirror for the darkness inside of us.
Yeah.
You really want to show them something that they can then relate with.
I did it to you, and you kind of brought it up. Your one character.
Oh, that one, yeah.
Yeah, I played a scene basically out with Sarah's character where she didn't really know what was going on until after it was done, and she realized that what she saw wasn't true, wasn't real, wasn't what she thought she was thinking, what she thought she was saying, that it was illusion, and the murder that had occurred was actually someone she knew.
There was definitely a crash at the end of it of like an
Yep.
Oh no.
Yeah. So those kind of things you have to be aware of, that you have that power to be able to do that. But I think, especially with horror and dread, that you really have to be careful how far you go.
Yeah.
Because it can get out of hand.
Oh, it can.
And if your players aren't ready for that kind of stuff or aren't prepared for it, I think you can push that envelope a little too far.
Well, and I think that's kind of one of the other aspects too of, like, especially the human side of horror, the psychological horror, is that I think it's easier to put something in front of them to make them to be the object upon which the horror is enacted, to make them feel it, rather than try to do it to the players themselves.
100% agree.
This is like basically the pillar upon which like the relatable villains are built, because they're posed as the villain, but a relatable villain is someone who kind of like leaves you asking, like, are they right? Like, I kind of see where they're coming from.
Yeah,
but they're doing all these atrocious things. But
bandits, kind of thing. Yeah,
but they're kind of right. But oh god, what does that make me?
Right. Right.
Or like Hannibal Lecter. Honestly, I think is a great example of this, because it's like he's polite, he's cultured, he's refined, professional,
super educated,
and a murderous cannibal. And only one of those things that I just listed is something that we don't really all aspire to be.
No.
Educated, right?
Yeah. So it's hard.
Yeah, I mean,
years of college.
Humans taste like chicken, so why not? Right?
Well, not all of us.
Okay. But it kind of leaves us feeling like like Hannibal Lecter is not such a bad guy when he's being nice and polite and actually defending Clarice at certain points, and but then he just murders everybody in the room, and you're like, oh, that's right, that's why he's the bad guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Knox kind of pointed out here something that's like, he kind of gave an example, but one of the things he said, like Dracula in Castlevania. I think Dracula is both.
No, I think it's a great example. Yeah.
Because he is very human in I'll say humanistic in a lot of aspects where you can identify his plight. I think in a lot of the retelling of Dracula's, that you get, like Bram Stoker's Dracula has so much human aspects to it that you sympathize.
Yeah.
You understand.
I mean, his wife was murdered.
Right.
I mean, so, wouldn't you kind of go a little bonkers if your wife were murdered?
Mm-hmm.
Can you kind of blame the guy? Is he a vile creature of the night who made a pact with the devil? Maybe.
Yeah. I mean, I'm with you.
Yeah. You can draw that straight line up until it diverges, and that's what's scary about it.
Yeah, actually,
is that you went along on that journey with him.
There's a book written by one of my friends, which I won't give all the tales to it, all the keys to it, but it's a beautiful book. And I'll post a link to it in the channel. But in it, he writes about a character who is immortal, effectively, but doesn't know his full past. And he's got this reoccurring vision that keeps coming back to him of this basically PTSD. And so he never has good sleep. He just doesn't. And part of that is being retold in the story as you discover what caused that. So there's a sense of dread waiting for that horizon in the story as you're reading it. Like, when did this happen? Why? And then when you get to it, you wished you didn't read it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's powerful. It's written very well, but it's a very powerful scene that he writes in there. And now you think about him a little differently. Like, he's not your typical protagonist. But he's also not an anti-villain. At the same time, so you're not sure how to weigh him. And he's a main character in this. The other character has her own flaws, clearly, and has her own background in the series. So there's this coupling that they kind of make up, and you're questioning, like, you're following them, but you're like, are they right? Are what they doing? Are they heroes, or are they struggling to survive with what they have?
Right.
And it's interesting. It's definitely interesting. I like those kinds of stories. So
all right, we are halfway through the show.
Are we halfway through this?
No, we are.
I think we are.
So we talked a lot about what horror and dread are, and kind of how what defines them, what evokes them.
Yeah.
How do you do it? How do you make it? What's the recipe?
Well, consent. We're going to start with that. Consent, conversation, and consent. Number one, always.
Horror is a genre, or is a mood that is very, very easy to hit people's PTSD triggers and stuff like that. So
even scenery. I mean, the last thing you want to do is have and I've watched it happen once. Not a good thing. It is not good to bring up war scenes, regardless of if they're fantasy or real, in front of people who've been to war scenes.
Yep.
That is challenging.
Yep.
Because you can't, many of us, I'm not going to say everyone in this podcast can't, because I'm willing to bet there are a few, and thank you. It's a horrific thing to have to go through. But for those who have been first responders, firefighters, police, military, paramilitary, Coast Guard, lifeguards, anyone who's had to see and deal with a traumatic situation, there are triggers laid out through that they're not 100% aware of.
Yep.
That comes to them.
Yep.
And how they handle those are very different. And some of them handle it one way, and some don't handle it other ways. So you have to be mindful of that as a storyteller, and that's hard. It's because you don't have that party distance of paper between you and them. So when you drop something to the table and it doesn't go like you expected, just be prepared that you might have to take a giant pause and just walk away from that whole scene and scrap it. So be prepared for that in these kind of situations. Anytime you're dropping a heavy mood like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
no, I will say one other thing, just on the player conversation and consent thing.
Sure.
There are just some people who just aren't affected by this and don't like it.
I agree.
I was kind of shopping around playing a game of Dread, like a little Call of Cthulhu one-shot horror sort of thing. And honestly, I think even you were just like, not really something I'm into.
No, I'm not I mean, I would do it if you needed an extra person. I'd be okay with doing it.
Yeah.
And I think I could find fun in it, but I don't like watching horror.
But you'd have to find the fun in it. There was something you were enthusiastic about.
Right.
I think I got a hard no from Sean too. He was no, it's not.
Yeah, Vicky's out, no doubt.
Absolutely not something I'm into.
She doesn't need stress in her life, and that's one of the things that's the type of game she does as well. So definitely is a shop around kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
all right. So you've had the conversation about consent. Have your players' attention.
oh god, yeah.
Okay.
That's hard enough.
Building suspense and horror and dread depends on an emotional buy-in
Yes.
from your players. Nothing's going to destroy the mood more than someone shouting, "Where's the Cheetos?" from the other room
So
while
true.
you're trying to describe an unfolding horror that's going
true.
on.
That is true. Yeah, it's about a certain level of ambiance, but that frames where you are. It frames that focus and making sure that everybody's there for that and holding that and keeping that suspense.
Yes.
That-
Someone's on their phone, you're gonna be like the slurping being comes out from in a slime trail from the shadows, revealing its many mouths. And wait, what's going on? I said many mouths. You know what? Whatever.
Yeah.
It attacks you. Roll initiative.
Yeah. But I think that's the thing is that as a storyteller who's telling a story about suspense, I think you have to have a little more center than to be able to just, do that.
Yeah.
To break away from it. Don't give up. Push through. Push past it.
Yep.
Push past your initial reactions of, crap, fuck it. Don't. Step back into it. Take a pause. Give them some anticipation. Make them listen for it.
Yep.
Keep your calm. Pull that chi if you need to. Maybe throw let your background music play a little longer.
Oh, background music is the greatest thing in the world.
I mean,
Because
we kind of did that opening.
It's free mood.
Yeah.
It is free mood.
Very true. Very true.
It has you can just play the music and it will start setting people on edge. Finding out that the soundtrack for Darkest Dungeon
Oh, yeah.
was on Google Play was and I think it's on Spotify and everything like that. So depending on what music platform you use, the Darkest Dungeon soundtrack is filled with great combat tracks, and a couple of those are really great, like just low, slow burn, creepy. If you need a scene that just fills you with dread, I used one in our last game.
You did.
It was a second to last game.
Yeah.
Where I introduced a gibbering mouther
Oh, my God.
into the story as a horror element, and we had a townsperson who had been driven insane, and they didn't really understand what the full picture was there. They kind of thought that maybe it had something to do with this mysterious, mind control crown that the bad guy was wearing. But they went to investigate, and this person just basically gibbered a bunch of like nursery rhymes and half-baked prophecy at them. And they were like, well, that was effed up. But they basically just knocked her out, dragged her out of the coal mine that she had locked herself in, and
Sent her home.
Sent her home to her husband.
Right.
Said, put her to bed, she'll be fine in the morning. In the middle of the night, he comes knocking on the door of the inn where you guys were staying, and with fear in his eyes looks at you and says, she's changed. And doesn't go into much other detail than that.
Let me then, from the player's perspective, paint the following picture. So we're like, go home, lock your door, we'll take care of this. We go toward the mine where she went. And literally the path to the mine is warped. Now, I'm not talking like messed up like a giant monster went through and swept the ground and that kind of thing. No, I'm talking about the iron rails that the carts go in and out of the mine are literally warped in ways that heat wouldn't warp them. And so we're looking at these things as we're moving closer and realizing that not just iron, but like everything, the wood, the door, everything is just oddly warped. And this is playing, which you can barely hear. I get that. There you go. It's a little... Yeah. So that gives you a feel for like just how ominous and odd this moment is for us.
They go into the mine and they can hear her gibbering madly. Just the way they were before, but there are other voices this time. Not just hers, but male voices, female voices, unidentifiable voices.
Right.
And they're all talking
Somehow
in unidentifiable tones and breaking into bits of laughter and crying piteously. And there's a wet slurping sound.
Okay.
Yes,
we're getting there.
exactly.
So that's where we're at with setting a dread moment.
Yes.
That is dread because you don't know what's coming. There's nothing but ambiance. It's a slow burn all the way to the door. We haven't even rolled dice yet at this point. Like, we're barely even there before this thing presents itself.
Sheebie-jeebie says, nope on a rope.
Oh, yeah, that I think that was for earlier, but I'll totally play that. I'll take that for the moment. So, understanding that, yeah, exactly. It's in, yeah.
Actually, that's a great point, Elamay.
Yeah.
Actually, barely audible was almost more creepy since you couldn't be sure if you were hearing something or not. Remember, the unknown is frightening.
Yeah, exactly, Knox. So remember that simple background music, pauses in your speech, kind of being indescribable is all part of that lingering dread that leads to horror. Like... Another example, I was reading about a guy who wanted to scare his players. So the players were entering a town at night. And he didn't expect to have this. He wanted the horror to be inside the inn. And he rolled, he's behind the table, he's behind his shield, and they're just like, okay, so you guys ride into town and it is dead silent. There's not a single sound but the wind rolling through and lightly rattling one of the shutters. What do we see? Roll perception. Everybody rolls. I rolled a 26. All of you look around and see no one. But then at the last second, Tom, you catch a shadow and then focus, and standing at the far end of town is a single solitary person. Right in the middle of the road leading out of town, his shadow just barely visible between the shadows of the trees. Okay? And you can only see him because of the glare on his eyes, because your infravision is picking up that just faint shadow, and it started to make his trail.
Oh, I'm into this.
And the players were like, we're leaving town.
Nope.
We're out. That's it. We're gone.
Yep.
We're gone. And that wasn't the horror. It was just one thing he added to the story.
Great.
And he was just like, well, I mean, technically there was one guy who was in town who was this old kook. And he just had him at the end of town staring at them. And he had good sneak, but not that good.
Yep.
And it was like, well, how would he? Oh, well, I guess Tom has infravision. So, yeah, we'll say that he catches the glint off of his eyes at that distance. And it was like, geez, that is creepy. And it's just setting the mood, right? So what else can we do?
All right.
How else can we bring this around?
I could probably do an entire episode on this one topic alone. I will try to sum it up very quickly because you know how I am with opinions.
And we only have like 15 minutes.
Environmental storytelling.
Yes.
Okay, so you can hand your players a startling realization described through the environment around them. Okay,
Yes.
Don't kind of like what Rob was talking about with my last session there, where he was describing what was going on the way to the mine.
Correct.
Okay, that's environmental storytelling. Okay, it was related to the monster because they gibbering mouthers warp the ground underneath them.
Right.
Now, up until this point, this was just a dark elf woman.
Right.
Her name was Narasa Hlas.
Yeah.
She was the alchemist's wife.
Sure.
She should not be warping the ground underneath her, especially not things like, steel rails for mine carts.
Exactly. Yeah. Same with the guy's description of the war.
The war. The war was
burning.
Great.
Again, it's all environmental right up until the moment that there's something to happen.
Exactly. So don't describe how the victim was murdered. Instead, describe them like the coating of black translucent ichor that's around the edges of the mirror and on the nightstand. Describe how several pieces of the furniture are tipped over. Not broken, just tipped over, signs of a struggle. Okay? Describe how there are shards of glass that are sticky with the same ichor that leave a trail all the way to the dead body that sits in the corner with a look of shock and horror, a twisted rictus still on its face even in death, with a single jagged shard of glass sticking out of the middle of the chest.
Yep.
Now, you haven't told them, oh yeah, a sludge monster broke out of the mirror somehow, which that leads some questions of its own.
Agreed.
Oh yeah, it looks like a some mirror monster from the Shadow Realm busted out of the mirror and stabbed him with it.
Yep.
Describe to them everything the Shadow Monster did, and leave them to go, oh crap, I know what happened here. Because if you hand them all the pieces and they put it together themselves, they personalize it.
Yeah.
And it makes it that level closer to them.
On the other side of that is the part that we're talking about in games where discovery is important. Like games where investigation is sometimes a skill that maybe one or two of the characters might have, and it's an important part of it. And in those kind of things, you can roll out those details in the same way. Instead of just saying, players, you walk into the room, the window is broken. Clearly the exit for which you found the body down below. Well, what else do I find? Roll investigation. I rolled a 29. You start retracing her steps from the window. Pieces of glass only on the outside, but small, bare footprints, barely moving, one right after the other, lead backwards, entering you into the bathroom. The tile floor slick from water.
Ooh.
And you just, again, you're leading them through that investigation. And they're waiting.
You're telling them how the horror unfolded, but not telling them what the horror was.
Correct. Correct. The investigation is showing them it and allowing them to start filling in those blanks. Absolutely. And again, that also keeps them tied because it's a question they asked. Whenever there's a roll, whatever you're saying is fact. And that is meaningful to the players. Whereas if you're exposing something to them, it might be up for perception. So you can leverage that as a weight as a storyteller. Is if you want to express fact and have their attention, tell them to roll a die. Even if it is meaningless, have them roll a perception. Have them roll an investigation.
Because they personalize it that little
bit.
It puts them right back in their character going, my character's doing this.
Correct. And you're now giving facts. And that will draw them. That helps pull that attention back together again. So
the last note I've got out here, and I think we definitely need to get to some questions real quick.
Yeah, definitely.
Is to describe the indescribable.
Oh, yeah.
There's a quote here I've got from H.P. Lovecraft.
I'm going to sit back for a second and go for it.
I know. There flapped rhythmically a horde of tame, trained, hybrid-winged things. Not altogether crows, nor moles, nor buzzards, nor ants, nor decomposed human beings, but something I cannot and must not recall. That's from The Festival by H.P. Lovecraft.
Yep.
And I always love that description because he told us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things that it wasn't, but kind of was, but not really. So you can kind of get this mental image of this mishmash of like different disparate things without ever saying it had a beak and it had feathers, but it had these hands,
right.
And and so your brain ends up filling in the blank space between these things that he tells you it isn't, but is kind of like. And you get this twisted image of what the Byakhee looks like in your mind. And if you're going to define, so describe things, even monsters like that. So don't say that there's like an Otuk coming out of the garbage heap. Describe it as, by its tentacles, by the rows of needle-sharp teeth that are lingering in its gaping, slathering maw. Describe the putrid shade of its tough and rubbery flesh and the swarming of the flies and the utterly inhuman screech that it makes as it emerges from the muck. That rather than just saying, oh yeah, you guys see an Otuk, roll initiative.
Right. And
you
it
know?
helps those players who don't know what a no-tuck is.
Yeah.
Or maybe was poorly described to them in the past. Like, I've had players who have been like, where you're like, the ogre stands before you. His mass at 8'9" and 460 pounds overpowers your small elven forms. Whoa. Did you just say he was 8'9" and 400 pounds? Yeah. That's the largest ogre I've ever seen. That's when the barbarian 2 steps away from you goes, I've seen bigger.
Yeah.
Again, you're framing that reference. You're helping them understand what they're seeing there. So always take the time to do that. Take your time, especially, I think that's one of the most important things is to take your time.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're reading something, pause, enjoy it. Let them draw in with you.
Plus, you want them lingering on every word.
Speaking of which, we have questions.
We have questions.
You know what? I'm going to go right to our special people.
All right.
Because they're here. So, Technolich, what is your favorite horror style? Same question for genre. We're going to set genre to the side. Let's just go for horror style.
I mean, because horror is kind of a genre.
I think it is.
As far as horror style goes, I'm a dread girl.
Yeah.
I absolutely adore that feeling of seeing and knowing that something horrible is there, but not being able to do anything about it. I'm a huge fan of the Silent Hill series, which I think does dread very well. Because they give you the in the games, typically you have a radio that gives off bursts of just horrible screeching white noise whenever there's an enemy near.
Yeah.
Like, they don't even try to jump scare you. They're
No.
like, no, he's within 30 feet of you, and this is just going to keep making this horrible noise, setting you on edge as it lumbers ever closer to you.
Yeah. I think for me, I'm more comfortable with horror, honestly. Because it comes in other forms, like I was saying. Like, horrific things are horrific. It's easier to do those types of storytelling. I don't like either in a personal sense, but I think I'm easier with horror than dread.
Okay.
Like, I can work with horror easier than I can with dread.
Sure.
I guess it's just my timing. I haven't done it enough to get used to it. But I see some power in it.
Yeah.
I definitely see
yeah.
some power in it. So I hope that answers your question. You want to do Overwatch?
Yeah, sure. What horror movie / book / show / genre would you most like to run a game in? Which would you rather play a game in? As far as horror settings go, I'm gonna go right back to Silent Hill.
Okay.
I'm a huge fan of the series. I love the lore behind it. Especially Silent Hill 2 was probably one of the greatest games ever made. Fight me. And I would both play and run a game there. I think I previously mentioned on the show that I wanted to run Wraith from White Wolf Games back in the day, but I would have stripped away everything they wrote about that setting and run it like Silent Hill 2.
Okay. I think I thought about this one because I saw the question. I was like, I think if I wanted to run a game, I would probably run a hybrid story of Space Hulk Warhammer 40K.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting.
where the rules are kind of light, and it's more about survival than anything else.
Okay. So no power hammers, no...
No, that's all part of it.
Oh,
Sure,
okay.
whatever. Like your Space Marines showed up on a Hulk, and it's one of your old derelict ships.
Oh, right. We're going to run in a little bit like Aliens and less like...
Exactly. I'd probably run something like that. But at the same time, there's other things that are going on there, clearly. Mm-hmm. It's not just one thing. Playing a game, I don't know if I'd want to play in a horror game or a dread game. I think I'd play horror over dread.
Yeah, okay.
I think I'd play horror over dread. And I would say there's definitely a couple of styles, like Urban Shadows can play horror. You can definitely get into it.
Yeah, you can do that.
Because it's more group storytelling.
Sure.
I think I'd feel more comfortable in that setting versus it feeling like it's impressed from one place, one vision point. That kind of a thing. So I think that's where I would go with that.
Okay.
So not my cup of tea, but I think I'd go that direction.
Sure.
So, all right. Who do you want to hit next?
I definitely want to go to Sparkle Motion.
Go for it.
Actually, because I think this is a long-time listener, first-time question asker.
Yeah, we've actually got 2 of those in this, so let's hit Sparkle and see if we can get through some of these.
All right, so Sparkle has a kind of a flurry of blows here. So what do you feel are elements that build fear-inducing environment? I think definitely the unknown.
Yes.
I think things like claustrophobia,
Yeah.
enclosed spaces, a feeling of helplessness is really big.
Texture.
Texture's
Texture's a big thing.
Texture's a big thing. I think the first thing you want to do is you want to pull the players out of their comfort.
Yeah.
Okay, so things that are described to them in uncomfortable environment,
Cold, wet.
cold or wet or
Damp.
stuffy and hot.
Yeah.
You want to possibly give them unsettling noises, or unsettling lighting, like flickering overhead fluorescent lights.
Yeah.
Or, very, very unsettling things like that. And I think once you've got people out of their comfort zone, it's very easy to evoke fear. Since she asks, what are elements you enjoy about a good horror storytelling? I enjoy the exhilaration of it, honestly. I really enjoy
reactions.
Yeah, walking away from it and just going like, oh,
Yeah,
God.
I think
what
in,
was
in
that?
storytelling, I like watching the reactions.
Uh-huh.
I like seeing that turn. That's fun for me.
Oh yeah, watching the looks on your guys' faces when I was describing the gibbering the gibbering mouther was amazing.
Yeah. What do you look for when making something scary but not having a monster? Anticipation. I think that's a big part of it. I think that if you don't have something that's just a monster, you anticipate whatever it is.
Yeah. I think either that or again you fall back on environmental storytelling, like you described it. The war. The war is not a monster necessarily.
No,
but it does horrible things, and it's a danger, and you see the horrible effects on it.
Yeah. What should story runners be taking into consideration so they make something scary writing horror, but not traumatizing their players? Consent is a big thing. Knowing your limits.
Consent's a big thing, but
boundaries.
Kind of like I said earlier too, acting upon an object that is not your players.
Yeah,
is
helps.
Probably the best. Like let them see the horrors that the monster or bad guy or whatever can enact, but don't do it to the players.
Right.
Do it to an NPC.
Yeah.
And then they'll understand without having to be physically affected by it and experience it themselves.
And never start a horror game in horror. Start a horror game in a milk run. Give them framing so that you can start finding the edges of your players.
Yeah. Put them in normal and then drag them slowly out of normal.
Right. And give them just uncomfortable situations and see how uncomfortable they get. Mm-hmm. That'll give you a good balance, and then you can slowly ramp up from that point and hold, and then slowly ramp up or bring down.
Definitely.
And see where they go.
Definitely.
Violet Ivy, thank you for a question, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead
Good
and
to see you,
shoot this one off.
Has every horror story already been written? How do you stay out of Tropesville and keep it fresh for your DM stylings?
I'm going to say no, because was it Cabin in the Woods? Which is a comedy in a way. It was kind of a comedy in a way.
It's a lot of things.
It's a lot of things, but it's a different horror story.
Yeah.
So no, there's always new horror, and again, horror is a broad topic.
Yeah, we're not just talking about slasher flicks.
Exists.
I mean, there's always man in rubber mask kills teenagers at camp.
Sure. But I mean, at the same time, there's different types of horror. I would assure you that Monument Men is a horror movie for somebody. An art critic, maybe, because there's literally a scene where one of them is standing on top of a mine in a mine shaft that is filled with art. Whole art that will never, ever be seen light of day if he lets his foot off that mine. And now they have to decide whether this museum curator, not a military guy, is going to live or die right there. And they're like, he's just like, get the stuff out of here. And at that moment, you're like, holy crap, it's horror. You're right there at that moment. So I would say horror is a very wide genre that you have to understand. Are we really that late?
Yeah, we are.
Wow. All right. Well, let's...
I would just simply follow up by saying, why bother keeping it out of Tropesville?
Yeah, go to it.
Lean into it. We've talked about tropes before.
Yep, we definitely have.
Absolutely. Trope is not a bad word. Lean right into Tropesville, absolutely.
You'll end up out of it.
How you tell your story and the players, what the players bring to it at their table is more important than any trope you're ever doing, and it will make it a personal thing for you.
Awesome. Roll us out there, Kate.
Wait a minute.
That's not Kate.
That's a rubber mask. Hold on a second. That's not Kate. That's Old Man Crenshaw.
And I would have got away with it if it wasn't for you rotten kids. No!
All right, well, tune in next week for Handling Divination. Like, how do you handle players who know your plot?
They can read the cards. They can see the future.
They got fate,
We'll
whatever.
talk about it all. You can find us online at on Twitter at @ST_Conclave, Instagram also ST_Conclave, and on Discord. You can find that link as the pinned tweet on our Twitter page, or you can also find it in the description of any of our episodes here on this podcast.
You can also get us on Patreon. Go and check us out at Storyteller Conclave there, where you can join us like Knox in a Box, who's been wonderful to us. Thank you again, Knox. Our intro music and outro music are both from Haunted Corpse. The intro music was The Haunted House, and what you're hearing now is The Undead. Both are found on freemusicarchive.org. We record here at Podcast Detroit. You can find them on Twitter at Podcast Detroit. Our engineer is Kate. She really is this time, not Old Man Crenshaw. And we'd like to thank our families. Sean, Vicky, thanks for hanging out with us. And all of our friends who make our games wonderful. And you.
Our listeners, we love you.
Good night.
Good night.